At the lawyer's office, right after the last document was signed, he leaned in just close enough for only me to hear and said, "Date someone, and you'll finally meet the real me." He didn't shout. He didn't slam a fist or make a scene. He smiled, like he was telling me a joke, like he wanted me to remember this moment not for its cruelty, but for its control. And I did. I remember every word, every breath, every twitch of that smug little smile. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and let me know the city you're watching from. Because what happened after this moment, it changed everything. We had been married for 41 years. We'd raised 2 kids, buried 1 dog, and nearly lost the house during the market crash in '08. Through it all, I stayed, not because I didn't know better, but because I still believed in, for better or worse. I believed in him. What a fool I was. The morning of the divorce, I made coffee the way I always had. French press, 2 sugars, 1 creamer, the same ceramic mug with the faded sunflower print. He bought it for our 20th anniversary in a gas station outside Sedona. I made him eggs too. I even buttered the toast. He didn't eat. He just stared at the TV, then at his phone, then back at the TV. When I asked if he'd like me to drive to the courthouse together, he said, "No, I'll meet you there." That silence on the way over? That was louder than anything he ever yelled at me in 40 years. I sat in that lawyer's office expecting some kind of closure, some small kindness, some civil goodbye. Instead, he leaned close and gave me a threat dressed like a promise. Date someone, and you'll finally meet the real me. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't grief. It was possession. I wasn't a person to him, I was a thing. A thing that embarrassed him now that I had the nerve to leave. What I didn't tell him was that I already knew the real him. I'd met him in pieces. In late-night accusations. In comments disguised as jokes. In years of shrinking so he could feel bigger. I knew him. But he didn't know me. He thought I was still the woman who flinched at raised voices. Who stayed quiet at dinner tables when he told his little jokes about my weight, my age, my memory lapses. He thought I'd never date. That I'd stay alone. That fear would keep me obedient. He was wrong. I stepped out of that office and into the sunlight like a woman waking up from a long, twisted dream. I felt the chill in the autumn air. I could hear the traffic on Main Street. The buzz of life still going on. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my car. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. From the sense that I had crossed a line I could never go back from. When I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't pour a glass of wine or turn on the sad playlist. I vacuumed. That man hated the sound of vacuums. I moved room by room, stripping the bed, tossing the sheets he always said were too soft, throwing out the half-used shaving cream he left in the shower. I opened windows. I let the wind in. And then, I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed now, and stared at my hands. They were still mine. That night, I slept with the lights off. No fear, no anxiety. But I kept the door locked. Not because I thought he'd come, but because I knew men like him don't disappear. They wait, they watch, they test the waters for weakness. But I wasn't weak. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Not because I had to, but because I could. There was no alarm set to match his schedule. No pot of coffee that needed to be brewing by 6:15. No coat laid out on the back of the chair. The house was still. And for the first time in years, that stillness didn't feel like loneliness, it felt like freedom. I moved through the house in my robe, barefoot on the cold hardwood floors. The morning light came in slow through the curtains, brushing soft gold across the kitchen counter. That used to be the hour I dreaded most. The time before he woke up. The time I braced myself. Would he be in a good mood? Would he mutter something cruel before the coffee even finished brewing? Now, it was just me and the humming fridge. I poured a single cup. Just one, for me. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the back door and stepped into the yard without telling anyone where I was going. That patch of grass? It used to be his. Every flower, every hedge trimmed to his taste. If I planted anything he didn't like, he'd say, "Why waste time on things that won't grow?" But now I could plant anything. I stood there, the wind cutting through my robe, my hands wrapped around the warm mug. And I realized, No one was going to ask me where I was. No one was going to say I looked tired, or comment on the weight I'd gained, or suggest I wasn't presentable before 10 a.m. No one. It was just me, and the frost on the grass, and the birds that didn't care who I used to be. Inside, I opened my laptop. It still had the sticky note on the corner: no Facebook. No emails after 6 p.m. His rules, his little systems of control masked as routines. I peeled it off, crumpled it, dropped it in the trash. Then I logged in. There were unread messages, some from friends I hadn't replied to in years, a few from my daughter, Clara, simple notes like, "Mom, are you okay?" or "Call me when you're ready." I wasn't ready, not yet. I spent the rest of the day going drawer by drawer, clearing the things that weren't mine: golf hats, warranty papers for tools I never touched, business cards from people I never met. I didn't cry. I cleaned. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, I was exhausted, not from sadness, but from release. Like every drawer I emptied made more space for myself. I ate dinner in silence. I lit a candle, not because it was a special occasion, but because I wanted it to be. And that night, as I got into bed, I looked over at the empty side next to me. I didn't miss him. What I missed was the idea of peace. And now, I was starting to feel what that peace actually sounded like. Silence. Real silence. The kind that isn't lonely, it's sacred. 3 days passed. No texts, no emails, not from him, not from Clara either. I thought that silence would mean safety. That maybe he meant what he said, that now we were divorced. He'd move on, that maybe the storm had passed. But men like him? They don't let go. They circle. On the 4th day, a package arrived. No note, no sender, just my name on the label. And inside, a photograph. It was me. Taken from across the street. In my robe, holding coffee, standing in the backyard that morning. The exact moment I thought I was finally alone. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just sat down, the photo resting on the counter like some kind of silent threat. I could hear his voice in my head. The same tone he used when he found the spare key missing once. "This house might be in your name now. But don't forget who built it." That was his game. Not loud, not violent. Just enough to remind me I was still being watched. Still being managed. I called the police, of course. They came, took a report, asked if I had any proof it was him. I said no, just suspicion. The officer nodded, kindly but tired. "If anything else shows up, give us a call." Then he left. And the house felt smaller than it ever had. That night, I checked every window lock twice. I kept the lamp on beside my bed. The old part of me, the part he trained, was back in my chest. Whispering, "You shouldn't have left. You shouldn't have smiled at that man in the hardware store. You shouldn't be alone." But I stayed in bed. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes ached. And then I whispered to the dark, "I'm not going back." The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought a new camera doorbell. I changed the locks. Again, not because I was afraid of what he'd do, but because I finally believed I had the right to protect myself. Around noon, Clara called. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to explain to her that the man she called Dad was still showing up without showing up. That even when he was legally out of my life, he still found ways to haunt the corners of it. That night, I made a promise to myself. No more waiting for the next shoe to drop. If he wanted a war, he wouldn't get one. He'd get silence. And consequences. By the end of that week, I stopped waiting for the mail. Whatever message he'd wanted to send with that photograph, I'd received it. Loud and clear. But unlike the woman I used to be, I didn't shrink. I got smarter. I started keeping a folder. Digital and printed. Copies of everything: photos, timestamps from my security cam, receipts from the locksmith, even my grocery list, just in case I needed to prove I was where I said I was. It wasn't fear, it was preparation. Because I knew men like him don't always show up with fists or shouts. They show up in courtrooms with fake smiles and forged narratives. And I wasn't going to be caught off guard. Clara called again. I still didn't answer. I loved my daughter, but there was a version of this story she wasn't ready to hear. Not yet. The one where her father wasn't the stern but fair protector she remembered, but a man who needed control more than love. A man who treated freedom, mine, as a threat. Instead, I poured my energy into rebuilding my world. I rearranged the furniture, got rid of the heavy oak table he insisted on keeping. The one he said was too expensive to replace. I donated it to the church thrift store and bought a round table, smaller, lighter, something just for me. I joined a book club, signed up for a pottery class. I even started walking the long way around the neighborhood, something I hadn't done in years because he always complained about wasting time. And then, 2 weeks after the photo came, he slipped. It was something small. An email. From a new address, under a fake name. But he forgot to change the signature. It read, "Sent from my iPad." And I knew exactly which iPad. The one I'd bought him for Christmas 5 years ago. The one I'd engraved with his initials. I didn't reply. I just printed it. Added it to the folder. That night, I made a second promise to myself. I would not chase justice. I would build it. Quietly. Brick by brick. I wasn't interested in revenge. Not the kind people expect, screaming in courtrooms or slashing tires in the night. What I wanted was peace. But peace doesn't come for free. You have to earn it. Sometimes, you have to build it with paperwork. So, I kept documenting. Each weird call that came through with no one on the other end. Logged. Each odd car parked across the street. Engine running? Photographed. Each new email, from no one. Archived. I bought a fireproof box. Labeled it with one word, proof. And every day, I added to it. This wasn't paranoia. This was insurance. Because I knew he'd try again. He couldn't help himself. He had spent 40 years building a world where I was smaller than him. Now that I'd stepped out of that frame, he didn't know where to aim his power. So he threw it into the shadows. That's where men like him feel safest. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. One morning, I went to the courthouse alone. Just to ask questions. Quietly. No paperwork. Just information. The clerk didn't flinch when I explained the pattern. The photos. The messages. The feeling. "You're not the first," she said. That told me everything I needed to know. Back home, I started putting together a timeline. Not just what had happened since the divorce. But everything. The time he told my sister she wasn't welcome in our home. The time he accidentally canceled my credit card before our anniversary trip. The time I found the list he made on his desk. Pros, cons of staying married. He never meant for me to see that. But once I did, it never left me. That night, I did something simple, something quiet. I moved the fireproof box from the closet to the trunk of my car. Not because I was going anywhere, but because I wanted it closer. He wasn't going to win this war, not by fear, not by silence, and certainly not by making me the crazy one. Let him keep trying. I was done being careful. I was getting ready. A month after the divorce was finalized, I walked into a lawyer's office, not the one we used for the paperwork. A new one with a receptionist who smiled like she saw women like me every day. She didn't ask why I was there. She just handed me a clipboard and said, "Take your time." The lawyer was young, not much older than Clara, but sharp, direct. He didn't flinch when I opened the fireproof box. Didn't ask why I hadn't come sooner. He just listened, nodded, took notes. When I finished, I said the words I hadn't said out loud until that moment. "I think he's trying to scare me back into being his." The lawyer didn't blink. "He's escalating," he said. "Let's get ahead of it." That was the shift. Up until then, everything I'd done had been about staying safe. But now I was preparing to win. We filed for a protective order. We opened a civil harassment case. We documented everything, laid it out like a roadmap of how men like him operate. Quiet, calculated, just beneath the legal radar, until suddenly, it wasn't. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. From the strange rush of reclaiming my name, my space, my voice. I opened Clara's message, the one I hadn't touched in weeks. It just said, "I don't know what's going on, but I'm here." I typed a reply, then deleted it. Not yet. There were still pieces she wasn't ready to see. Instead, I stood by the window, watching the street. For once, I didn't check over my shoulder. I didn't wonder if I was being watched. Because it didn't matter. He could watch all he wanted. He could whisper threats from a distance. He could send photos and play ghost. But I wasn't afraid of ghosts anymore. I had my truth. I had my records. And now? I had the law. The court date wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices. No shouting. No thrown accusations. Just paperwork, statements, a judge with tired eyes and a quiet gavel. But in the silence of that room, something shifted. He showed up in a crisp suit, hair combed, face clean, the same polished image he always wore when the world was watching. He smiled when he saw me. I didn't smile back. He sat across the aisle, acting confused, concerned, like all of this was just a misunderstanding. When the judge asked if I had evidence, I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. I handed the file over. 3 months of dates, screenshots, photos, timestamps, email headers, license plate sightings, all labeled, numbered, organized. My lawyer didn't embellish. Just presented. Facts don't need decoration. When they called him to respond, he tried humor. Tried charm. Tried playing the man, worried about his ex-wife's safety. As if his creeping was some form of protection. But the judge wasn't new. And I wasn't alone. I had documentation. I had a voice. I had every quiet moment he thought I was shrinking into fear, but instead, I was writing it all down. He didn't see it coming. That's the thing about men like him. They underestimate women who don't shout. They think silence means surrender. But my silence was strategy. By the end of that hearing, the protective order was granted. 90 days to start. Extension pending. He was told to stay away. No contact, no visits, no notes. He didn't argue. He just stared at me. Like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Because he didn't. He was looking for the version of me that flinched, that apologized, that stayed small. But she wasn't in the courtroom. She hadn't been around for a long time. I walked out before he did. Not to rush. But to remind myself, I had nothing more to say. Nothing more to prove. It was over. Or at least, the part where he controlled the narrative was. It didn't hit me until a week later. I was standing in the grocery store, holding a jar of honey. Local, raw, expensive, the kind he always said was a waste of money. And for the first time in years, I didn't put it back on the shelf. I just put it in the cart. That was it. That was the moment I realized peace wasn't something I was chasing anymore. It was something I had stepped into. Quietly, without fanfare. It wasn't about court orders or locked doors anymore. It was about living without waiting for the other shoe to drop. I took long drives with no destination. Listened to music I hadn't heard since before the kids were born. Danced in the kitchen with no one watching. I made a playlist called Nobody's Opinion Matters. And I played it loud. The house felt different now. Not haunted, not hollow. Just mine. I hung up new curtains. Not the beige ones he liked, bright ones. Orange, wild, too much, probably. But every time I looked at them, I smiled. Because they weren't chosen for anyone but me. Clara came by that weekend. She didn't say much at first. Just looked around. You moved the furniture, she said. I nodded. Yeah, I needed space. She paused, then asked, Are you okay? I didn't lie. I said, I'm getting there. She didn't push, just sat beside me on the new couch. The one I bought secondhand. With floral print and slightly creaky legs. The one you would have hated. We watched a movie, shared popcorn. She held my hand halfway through like she did when she was little. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to anyone. That night, after she left, I lit a candle. The scent was cinnamon and clove. Too strong, he would have said. I let it burn anyway. And when I went to bed, I didn't check the locks twice. Not because I thought the world was safe. But because I finally trusted that I could handle it if it wasn't. It started small. A trip to the farmer's market on a Sunday morning. The kind of outing I used to avoid, too crowded. Too exposed. Too many chances to run into people who'd ask too many questions. But that day, I went. No makeup, no plan, just a canvas bag and a promise to myself. Walk slow, breathe deep, don't look over your shoulder. The sun was gentle, the kind of autumn warmth that clings to your sweater just long enough before the wind reminds you it's almost winter. I bought pears, a jar of jam, a small basil plant. I stopped at a booth with handmade soaps. And the man behind the table smiled. Not the kind of smile that asks anything. Just kind. You like lavender or citrus? He asked. I said, I don't know yet. He laughed, not unkindly. Try both. I walked away with 2 bars in a brown paper bag and a strange flutter in my chest. Not fear. Not nerves. Just something waking up. Later that afternoon, I opened the front door of my house and realized I didn't rush to lock it behind me. I didn't check the porch for packages or strange shadows. I just walked in. That night, I made tea and opened Clara's last message again. I finally typed back, I'm ready to talk. This weekend? She responded in under a minute. Yes, I've been waiting. I didn't owe her the full story. Not all at once. But I owed her the truth in pieces. The version of me that had been buried beneath decades of quiet tolerance. Saturday came. She brought pastries. We sat on the porch, the basil plant between us. And I told her a little. Not about the worst of it. But enough. She cried, not because she was sad, but because, I think, she finally saw me, not just as her mother, but as a woman who had survived something invisible. Something most people never talk about. When she left, she hugged me tighter than she had in years. And whispered, I'm proud of you. I didn't cry. I just breathed. That was enough. I saw him again on a Thursday. It had been weeks since the court order. Weeks of silence. Weeks of air that didn't feel like glass beneath my feet. I was walking out of the hardware store. Just 2 light bulbs and a bag of potting soil. He was across the street, leaning against his car, talking on the phone, or pretending to. He didn't wave, didn't move. But he saw me. And I saw him. The woman I used to be would have turned around, pretended to forget something, waited 5 minutes until he drove away. But that version of me? She didn't make it through the courthouse doors. So I kept walking. Not faster, not slower. I didn't stare, didn't nod. Just moved forward like I had nothing left to defend. And you know what? He didn't follow. He got back in his car, shut the door too hard, pulled away like he was the one trying not to be seen. I stood at my trunk for a moment, not because I was shaken, but because I wasn't. Not even a tremble in my hand. Back home, I repotted the basil. Gave it a new clay pot. Deeper roots. It looked brighter somehow, like it belonged now. Later that night, I opened the drawer where I kept the file, my quiet wall of proof, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to add to it. It was still there, still organized, still ready, if needed. But it wasn't my armor anymore. It was my archive. A record of how far I'd come, not a shield against what might happen. Because the real power? It wasn't in the restraining order. It wasn't in the lawyer's name on the paper. It was in me. In the way I didn't change my route. In the way I didn't lower my eyes. In the way I never gave him the satisfaction of fear. He had spent so long trying to make me small. But now, every step I took without looking back made that version of me, his version of me, fade a little more. That night, I slept with the window cracked open. Just a little. Just enough to let in the breeze. And not once did I think about locking it. I thought freedom would feel loud. Like a celebration, a parade, fireworks on the front lawn. But it wasn't. It felt like a quiet morning with nowhere to be. It felt like reading a book all the way through without checking the clock. It felt like walking into the kitchen and making whatever I wanted. Even if it didn't make sense together, toast, a peach, and leftover soup, because no one was watching, judging, or commenting. I started doing crossword puzzles again. Not the easy ones in the back of the mailers, but the hard ones. The kind that used to frustrate him. He hated when I did them. Said they were a waste of time. But now, I'd sit by the window and let the morning light spill across the page while I filled in answers slowly. Messily. No pressure. Just ink and peace. One afternoon, I ran into an old neighbor at the pharmacy. She looked surprised to see me alone. "How've you been?" she asked. Careful. The way people are when they've heard whispers but don't know what's true. I smiled. Not forced. Not fake. "Better than I expected," I said. And I meant it. She nodded. Didn't push. But her eyes softened, like she'd seen something in me she hadn't before. Maybe it was the posture. Maybe the stillness in my voice. Maybe it was just the absence of fear. Back home, I made tea and watched the leaves outside shift from green to gold. Autumn used to feel like an ending. Now it felt like a clearing. Not a closing chapter, but a season that made room for something else. I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. I wasn't bracing for retaliation. I wasn't rehearsing answers in case someone asked the wrong question. I was just here. Alive. Unapologetically ordinary. And in that ordinariness, I found something better than safety. I found belonging. Not in him. Not in my daughter's approval. Not in the silence I'd once used as a shield. But in myself. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. It's been nearly a year since the divorce was finalized. Almost a year since that day in the lawyer's office, when he leaned in and hissed, "Date someone, and you'll finally meet the real me." Back then, I thought those words were a threat. Now, I see them for what they were. A confession. He wasn't afraid I'd fall in love again. He was afraid I'd learn to live without fear. And I did. I didn't find a new man. I didn't dye my hair or move to a new city. I didn't throw a party or post long speeches online. I rebuilt quietly. Deliberately. One dish at a time. One safe night of sleep. One morning walk where I didn't scan the sidewalk. And with every tiny act of reclaiming, something inside me shifted, from survival to sovereignty. Some days are still heavy. Healing doesn't come all at once. It arrives in whispers. In the way I now laugh with my whole face. In how I buy fresh flowers on Thursdays. Just because. In how Clara calls more often, and not because she's worried. But because she wants to. There's a photo of me now, taken by her. On our last visit. I'm sitting on the porch. Tea in hand, sunlight cutting through my sweater. When she showed it to me, I didn't even recognize myself at first. Not because I looked younger. But because I looked free. He never did get to show me the real him. But I got to meet the real me. And she's someone I wish I'd known sooner. To the woman listening to this, maybe you're still in the silence. Still checking locks. Still waiting for someone to believe you. I do. I believe you. And more importantly, there's a version of you waiting on the other side of fear. She's not loud. She doesn't need to be. She's steady, whole, and when you meet her, you'll know. You were never broken. You were just waiting for the day you stopped apologizing for breathing. And maybe today is that day.